It is the year 2017. Having more than one child is illegal, and if you violate this rule, you wind up in prison.
Your babies are the property of the Mentel Corporation. Crime does not pay.
Yes, folks, that's right. This week, we're going to talk about the 1993 Christopher Lambert film, Fortress.
You're smiling. How the fuck can you be smiling?
Directed by Stuart Gordon and co-starring Lauren Loughlin, the great 80s and 90s villain Kurtwood Smith, a very young Clifton Collins Jr., Vernon Wells, Lincoln Kilpatrick, and Jeffrey Combs.
Crime does not pay.
Prisoners, your attention, please. You are about to enter the Fortress, a maximum security prison operated by the Mentel Corporation.
So, again, the year 2017, and the population being kept under control by this one child per couple rule.
Crime does not pay.
Abortion is illegal, and parents who violate this rule are imprisoned for life while their children become the property of the evil Mentel Corporation. Enter John and Karen Brennick, whose first child died and are now pregnant with their second. Caught at the border as they try to escape into good old Canada, the two are sent to an underground supermax prison run by the genetically altered Poe.
What are you?
I'm enhanced.
Here played by Kurtwood Smith, who has designs on Karen, while John plots an escape.
I don't think you realize your predicament, Brennick.
Back in the late 80s and early 90s, Christopher Lambert, as you called him here in America, although in Quebec we called him Christophe Lambert, after all, he was French, occupied kind of an interesting place in the pantheon of action heroes.
There can be only one.
So he definitely wasn't A-list like Schwarzenegger or Stallone.
Let it go.
And he wasn't even really B-list like Steven Seagal or Jean-Claude Van Damme. He was in the direct-to-video realm, but he was at the top of the heap in terms of direct-to-video films.
You have the manners of a goat, and you smell like a dung heap, and you have no knowledge whatsoever of your potential.
Theatrically, his movies sometimes would get released, but they never did particularly well in North America. Some of them were kind of semi-hits, but Highlander, don't forget, only actually grossed about $5.9 million domestically.
You look like a woman, you stupid haggis.
Highlander 2 actually did better.
Hate you.
He had a real following, though, on the home video market thanks to these early films, and he was a legit star in Europe. Thus, you kind of got these middle ground movies like Gunmen,
I gotta tell you, I don't swallow.
or Night Moves,
Checkmate.
which did technically get theatrical releases, but were bigger hits overseas and did very well in video stores.
I have something to say. It's better to burn out than to fade away.
So when this movie came out, there was some effort being made to elevate Lambert to an upper echelon of movie stars. You know, the thinking being that he could at least be a Steven Seagal style star.
I'm just a cook.
A cook?
Fortress was a notable example. It got a kind of wide release from Dimension, which was then a subsidiary of Miramax, and it grossed about $6 million domestically.
Dead on arrival.
Didn't make much of a dent in North America, but overseas, Fortress was actually a pretty huge hit, one of Lambert's biggest ever, bigger even than some of the Highlander movies,
Your sentimentality is touching.
grossing a huge $48 million. Truly almost unheard of for a movie that did so poorly in its home territory. Lambert's career got a bit of a boost, with Highlander 3, The Final Dimension, also getting a North American release, and then The Hunted, which was actually a real studio movie from Universal. Plus there was also Mortal Kombat, in which he played Raiden.
You have been chosen to defend the realm of Earth in a tournament called Mortal Kombat.
All of them did pretty well, internationally that is, and on video, but in theaters, they were all flops except for Mortal Kombat. And of course, he was not the star of that movie, so it didn't help him out that much. Fortress, however, is Christophe Lambert at his best, and I vividly remember seeing ads for Fortress in the newspaper when I was growing up in Quebec. You see, Christopher Lambert, or again, as we always called him when I was young, Christophe Lambert, really did have a big following because, you see, he was a star in France, and French celebrities kind of had more crossover appeal here in Quebec. He would often show up on chat shows in Montreal to promote his movies in French. And I think he was a much more lively guy speaking French than he was speaking kind of his halting English.
That was probably the most difficult side of it, is to forget about yourself and just be an animal.
What really excited 10-year-old me at the time was there was a blurb on the ad in the newspaper that said the movie was more powerful than Total Recall. I mean, more powerful than Total Recall? I loved Total Recall so much at the time that this immediately shot up to the top of my must-see list. And in the summer of '93, when I was 11, I biked up to my local video shop, rented the tape, and being pretty excited. Was it more powerful than Total Recall? Hell no. But you know what? I still really liked it.
You don't understand pleasure.
And after it showed up on the Movie Network, which was kind of the Canadian HBO here in Canada, I pretty much wore out my VHS recording of it.
Whoa. You should see what you fools look like through this thing, man.
So, at the time, I was a pretty heavy Lambert fan. I loved the first Highlander. I didn't really care for Highlander 2, although I did defend it at times, and Highlander 3 is probably the worst movie I ever saw in theaters. But Fortress. That was the golden era of Christophe Lambert.
My name is Brennick.
Of course it is.
When I saw it hit Amazon Prime a couple months ago, I was cautiously optimistic about revisiting it, but I knew that given that it's a 26-year-old B movie from the 90s, it might not hold up super well.
This might hurt a little bit, okay?
To my surprise though, Fortress is still a good little futuristic action adventure. It's definitely goofy.
You will be lucky if you end up a speaking spell.
But it's also fast-paced and fun, and I think the reason it holds up so well is because it's directed by Stuart Gordon, director of Reanimator.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
And he's one of the more underrated genre directors of the era. He loads the movie with enough grand guignol gore and sly social commentary that he might be forgiven for thinking this was a lost Paul Verhoeven flick. And had it been made on a bigger scale with a bigger star in the lead, it might have made his career. Fact is, this was actually designed as an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
You're shitting me. I'm not shitting on you.
That's what Stuart Gordon said in an unsourced interview that was found on IMDb. As he said, it was Arnold Schwarzenegger that got me the job, and it was because of Reanimator. We used Arnold's body double in Reanimator. The first reanimated corpse is a guy named Peter Kent, who was Arnold's double. He's got those big muscles. He got Arnold to see Reanimator, and Arnold liked it so much that he had a screening of it in his home, inviting all these people, including producer John Davis. John had the rights to Fortress, and Arnold was going to do it, but for some reason, I'm not sure why, Arnold finally decided he wasn't going to do the movie and dropped out. They had a huge budget, something like $60 or $70 million, which was pretty big in those days. But anyways, he dropped out, and the budget went way down. They cut the budget to about $15 million. Even still, you gotta say, he really did pull a lot out of his budget. Stuart Gordon made a great looking movie, and Christopher Lambert is a very likable lead, even though I would say he's arguably miscast as an American ex-soldier. I mean, why didn't they just say he's French? Or at least American by way of France? I mean, he's got that really thick accent that's very noticeable. Anyway, what I always liked about Lambert was that he had this really cool everyman vibe and kind of a vulnerable streak. He didn't look like a supreme badass, so it always kind of made it a surprise when he'd eventually break out into old-fashioned ultra-violence. And the movie has that in spades because, yeah man, it is violent at times. And you know what? Critics actually kind of liked it. Christophe Lambert even noted in an interview with Den of Geek that there was a great review for it in the New York Times, which, as he said, he was flabbergasted about. Because I was saying, wow, the New York Times gave me like 4 stars for Fortress. Lambert is supported by an ace cast of character actors. Lauren Loughlin is good as his wife, but truth be told, female roles back in this era were really nothing to write home about, so she's stuck in a somewhat generic part. She looks great though. Yet, Kurtwood Smith is amazing as the head warden baddie, Poe.
Welcome home, baby.
Shall I intestinate?
Just a moment longer, Zed. This is a fascinating dream.
That is a nice compliment to his iconic turn in RoboCop.
RoboCop!
I always actually found it funny that he's probably most famous to millennials for his comic role as Red on that 70s show.
How'd you like to own a little bit of my foot in your ass?
Because when I was a kid, he was always evil in movies, not this kind of lovable curmudgeon that people see him as now.
Bitches leave.
Jeffrey Combs from Reanimator steals a lot of scenes as Lambert's long-haired mechanic cellmate.
This bitch is highly sensitive, man. We're talking TNT on PMS.
And you'll also see a young Clifton Collins Jr., then billed as Clifton Gonzalez,
scared don't survive inside,
playing the guy that Lambert has to protect from Vernon Wales's hulking jailhouse rapist.
Rise and fucking shine, asshole!
Oh yes, this leads to a massive action fight scene between Lambert and Vernon Wales, which ends with a nifty, gory display of a device called the Intestinator.
Prisoners, a demonstration.
But beware, there are versions of this movie that are out there that have censored all of the best gore bits. On Amazon Prime, it was all intact even though the movie was panned and scanned to 133:1, which kind of sucks. There's a lot of different versions of this movie out there. And it seems that a legitimate Blu-ray release of this movie is actually kind of tough to come by, possibly due to rights problems. There's even a version of the movie that just ends with them escaping from a prison and is completely lacking the last big action set piece where Brennick goes up against this futuristic tank with a machine gun. It's one of the best scenes in the movie, so it's kind of weird to think that they just chopped it out of different versions of the film, but what can you do? All in all, Fortress is a really solid blast of early 90s action movie nostalgia. Is it a great movie? Probably not, but it's a really fun one, and it is well worth checking out.
Night, night, sweetie. What do you think, huh? Even comes with a matching hat. Feel like a dork. I never really saw myself as a cop, you know? I mean, I'm more like the bad guys. I don't like rules very much, and this sounds like a 9-to-5 thing. I mean, I want the big score. I want the brass ring, the pot of gold, and then I want to retire, you know?
There's a Timbuk 3 song that starts the 1992 action movie called Kuffs. The song is called The Future's So Bright, I Gotta Wear Shades. And you could have said the same thing about Christian Slater's career when this movie came out in January of 1992. The guy was on a mega roll. 1988's Heathers established himself as kind of the James Dean of the 1980s, and he started the 90s on a great roll. He had Pump Up the Volume, which wasn't a huge box office hit, but became this kind of staple of video stores everywhere with this amazing soundtrack. And he was in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which made boffo box office and gave him a plum co-starring role as Will Scarlet. He was so popular at the time that he even had a little cameo in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and I remember as an 8-year-old seeing it in theaters and hearing teenage girls screaming in the audience, "Oh my god, it's Christian Slater!" Because that's how popular he was. I remember my dad even turned to me and elbowed me, he's like, "Hey, that's Christian Slater, look, Christian Slater." Everybody liked Christian Slater, and you would figure that Kuffs, which adheres very closely to the 1980s wisecracking movie star, action star formula, would have done a lot of business. But alas, that's not quite how things worked out for this week's Best Movie You Never Saw.
Well, we should still have you. Old, reliable. Oh.
So let's dig into Kuffs, which was directed by Bruce A. Evans, had a great soundtrack by Harold Faltermeyer, and co-starred Tony Goldwyn, an impossibly young Mila Jovovich, and Brooks Broxliner before he signed on to do Babylon 5. Teen Idols just didn't get much bigger than Christian Slater was in 1991. Fresh off of Heathers and Pump Up the Volume, which established him as kind of a teenage Jack Nicholson, Slater tried to branch out a little bit, and Kuffs was indeed an effort to appeal to his fan base, but also establish him as a wisecracking grown-up superstar, kind of in the Eddie Murphy mode.
He's gonna have to get his hair cut, put on a uniform, and get rid of that attitude.
It should have worked. After all, Slater was so popular at the time that you could have put him in anything and teenage girls would have gone to see it. In fact, I remember my sister distinctly went to see this movie and did not bring me along, despite the fact that I wanted to see it. Thanks, Jen. Kuffs, with its PG-13 rating and hip marketing campaign, should have really been next level for him, but the film crashed and burned at the box office, opening to very middling reviews and topping out at $21 million at the box office.
I don't know, maybe it's just the post-gunshot blues, but I'm beginning to feel like I'm not exactly cut out for this line of work, you know?
That wasn't an awful number for the era, although one assumes that after home video and cable, the movie just about broke even. That said, it did not launch Slater into the stratosphere, although for a while it definitely didn't hurt his career because he went on to star in the iconic True Romance and then, of course, John Woo's Broken Arrow a few years later. While his career kind of leaned out in the late 90s and 2000s, he's since re-established himself quite well as a TV star thanks to Mr. Robot and Dr. Death, so don't feel too bad for old Christian, he's doing just fine. Now, I have to admit that I have a kind of lingering affection for Christian Slater, mostly because as a kid I saw all of his movies over and over and over again because my older sister was just about obsessed with him. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Pump Up the Volume got repeat play in my childhood household, and Kuffs was another Slater vehicle that I saw a lot of. In some ways it feels like one of the last gasps of 1980s action cinema, despite the fact that it was made in 1992. A few concessions were made for the teenage market, but not so many that it doesn't work as a cool action flick. For one, it's got the cool, wise guy hero, with Kuffs very much in the mode of Eddie Murphy's Axel Foley.
Hey, asshole! Yes, you. Look, if you're gonna jump, jump. Otherwise, use the bridge like everybody else. You're screwing up traffic down there.
They even got Harold Faltermeyer to do the soundtrack, because of course he had done XLF. Had this movie performed at the box office, I could have easily seen Kuffs becoming a franchise character, and I like the premise that he's not a cop but rather the head of a civilian auxiliary police force, because you see, such a thing does exist in San Francisco.
Well, maybe we should wait for the police. You know, they have
Wait, you are the police? What the hell you think I'm paying you for? Come on!
They're like rent-a-cops, but on a much larger level. So, in this movie, he plays George Kuffs, who's an irresponsible young man that gets his girlfriend pregnant, his girlfriend being played by Mila Jovovich, who was only about 15 at the time.
What do you think, Georgie? I'll tell you what I think. I'm history, that's what I think.
And he goes to his brother for some financial aid. Of course, his brother, who happens to head this civilian auxiliary police force, is shot to death by some scumbag villains, and Kuffs joins the force in order to avenge his death and, of course, prove to his girlfriend that he has what it takes to be a dad.
Why are we doing so much running? Aren't we all gonna be in cars?
Move it, asshole! Move it! Move it! Move it!
To tie it into the more established formulas, Kuffs is given a partner in Tony Goldwyn, and he's a cop that he's paired with that the two hate each other at first, right? Because it's a buddy cop movie, kind of. Tony Goldwyn's kind of this straight arrow cop who's in big trouble because he's been sleeping with his chief's wife. Ooh, pretty big mistake.
What'd you do? Sleep with the captain's wife or something?
No. The chief's.
But of course, they eventually become friends and they launch a full-on gun-toting assault on the baddies at the end because, well, it's an action flick.
You're all under arrest. Now come out from around the cars there and lay down on the ground or something.
Yeah, that's good.
It even has that super cheesy but fun score by Harold Faltermeyer and a pop song fueled soundtrack, just in case you ever doubt for a second that this is a Beverly Hills Cop clone. Overall though, Kuffs is a pretty amusing little action flick. Slater's got the cool guy shtick down cold, and his chemistry with Goldwyn is top notch. If Kuffs has any real failing, it's that it's so by the numbers in the way it ticks off all the cop movie cliches that even back in 1991 it probably seemed familiar, although watched nowadays, all this can be overlooked in favor of retro coolness. I wish the movie had a few more oddball touches, because the parts where Kuffs goes off book is probably the best bits of the movie. There's a great one where Goldwyn and Slater are too broke to afford the arsenal that they need for the final assault on the villains, so they have to go to a gun shop and inquire about the gun shop's return policy.
Let me have 2 9mm and a couple boxes of shells. Can we return these when we're done? I didn't think so.
Mostly, though, it's all standard fun stuff, with a pretty weak villain. However, one who has a very cool henchman that's played by Leon Rippey and has the best action scene in the movie, the apartment shootout where Kuffs shoots him through the head that he's wearing on like a t-shirt that has his own face on it. I mean, I thought that was the coolest thing when I was a kid. I thought that was badass. And then, of course, there's also the somewhat inappropriately cast Mila Jovovich, who's only about 15 or 16 when she played Christian Slater's pregnant girlfriend, although he was quite young at the time too, so I think you could kind of overlook the ick factor somewhat, and of course it was the early 90s. A little bit different, that was the era. Now, one of the concessions that Kuffs had to make to its teen audience was the fact that in order to pull in Christian Slater's fanbase, there was no way this could ever get an R rating. Given the body count and gun violence, which is pretty high up, it was touch and go, but in the end they squeezed by with a PG-13. But one of the ways they got around this kind of creatively was to bleep out all the F-bombs in Tony Goldwyn's mad tirade against Kuffs in their little meet cute.
Did you see a crime being committed?
If we follow him, we will see a crime being committed.
You are a patrol special. You don't go looking for a crime.
You have a limited vocabulary, Ted.
I thought this was a really cool little scene because you could tell he's saying the F word like crazy, and he uses the police signal to kind of blurt it out. I always thought that was kind of a nice little move. Now, if you want to see Kuffs, you can actually find it on a pretty nice Blu-ray from Shout Factory, and it also shows up on streaming platforms now and again. It's a pretty fun little movie. I wouldn't say it's a classic, but it's definitely one of the more fun, teen-driven action movies of the era. Imagine like a big screen version of 21 Jump Street done seriously, and you kind of got what Kuffs is going for. In my opinion, it's a solid B-movie entry into the genre, and well worth a look for fans of the era or fans of Christian Slater's. And of course, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend checking out Alan Moyle's Pump Up the Volume, which gives Christian Slater one of the best roles he ever had, and is another movie that people don't really talk about enough. And if you like this kind of program, make sure to click on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support. Man is the most dangerous game. This has been one of the central tenets of action movies ever since the genre began, thanks largely to the very influential short story by Richard Connell, The Most Dangerous Game, which has been adapted on film many times. Perhaps the most famous is RKO's 1932 classic The Most Dangerous Game, which was shot by the team behind King Kong on many of the same sets. With the story and premise falling into the public domain as the action genre reached its zenith in the 80s and 90s, the premise started to work its way into contemporary action flicks, such as, of course, Hard Target with JCVD, the nasty Australian movie Turkey Shoot, the infamous cheapy Deadly Prey, and oh so many more. To this day, it remains a staple, with the recent The Hunt and Beyond the Reach, two examples of movies that owe a lot to The Most Dangerous Game. One of the best, though, is a now obscure action flick called Surviving the Game, which came out in 1994 and starred Ice-T, Rutger Hauer, Gary Busey, Charles S. Dutton, John C. McGinley, and F. Murray Abraham, and it's this week's Best Movie You Never Saw.
Glad I got this job, but I still don't understand what it is about hunting animals to get you off.
It's not about killing. It's not about death. It's about life.
Flashback to the early 90s. Wesley Snipes was one of the hottest action stars out there, with him having a few smash hits under his belt that included Passenger 57, Demolition Man, and a whole lot more.
You ever play roulette?
On occasion.
Well, let me give you a word of advice. Always bet on black.
He broke out in the urban action classic New Jack City, and soon Hollywood turned its attention to his antagonist in that film, rapper Ice-T. Indeed, Ice-T proved to be a natural on camera, playing supporting roles in the Denzel Washington action flick Ricochet and the Walter Hill thriller Trespass. Outside of New Jack City, he'd never really gotten the chance to play an action lead, so he was the perfect choice to headline New Line's Most Dangerous Game riff, as of course he was also a platinum-selling artist at the time, so he was a pretty big star. As mentioned earlier, this was a popular kind of action movie, as you can do the man-on-the-run movies pretty low budget. All you need is an isolated locale and some cool character actors. And indeed, director Ernest R. Dickerson, who was then best known as Spike Lee's cinematographer, was able to assemble a really solid cast. In the movie, Ice-T would play a down-on-his-luck homeless man who's whisked away to a remote cabin with the promise of employment as a hunting guide.
My business partner and I, we need someone to help us as a survival guide with our hunts. I know shit about the wilderness. With my recommendation, you'll have a decent chance of getting the job.
Once there, he's presented with a rogues gallery of rich weirdos, and soon he realizes that these hunters are into a peculiar kind of hunt, man, and that he's the guy they're going to be chasing. But, like another homeless action hero before him, Jean-Claude Van Damme's Chance Boudreaux in Hard Target, he's no pushover, and soon the resourceful guy starts picking off his pursuers one by one. What makes surviving the game so effective is that they really do stack the deck against Ice-T right from the start. With his slight build, Ice-T doesn't really seem like an action hero, and he seems very out of his element in the wilderness because, you know, we all see Ice-T as this streetwise rapper, right? His character doesn't use brute force to fight the bad guys. Instead, he uses ingenuity and street smarts to take out his pursuers. He's an underdog at a low ebb in his life, with the movie establishing him as suicidal early on following the loss of his family, and in fact, as the film starts, his best friend, an old homeless guy, and his dog are both killed. Things are not going well for him. The cast of heavies in this is absolutely brilliant. Charles S. Dutton was coming off of Alien 3, and he plays the lone black member of the crew who Ice-T's character initially thinks is out to help him, but in reality, he's the guy that's chosen Ice's Jack Mason as the group's prey.
Are you sure about this one?
Oh, I'm sure.
Has he got courage?
He works for Rutger Hauer's character, Thomas Burns, who we realize has been setting up these hunts for years, with the rich hunters all paying $50K each for the privilege of taking part in the hunt and killing a man. The other members of the hunting party include Gary Busey, F. Murray Abraham, John C. McGinley, and a young William McNamara. Now, it's worth mentioning that all of these guys were pretty popular action movie bad guys in the moment. I mean, F. Murray Abraham was just coming off of Last Action Hero, and of course had won an Oscar for playing one of the greatest screen villains of all time, Salieri, in Amadeus.
Did my work please you? I never knew that music like that was possible.
Gary Busey, of course, had just done Under Siege, and John C. McGinley was always turning up in these movies as kind of an antagonist-type character, including his snot-nosed FBI director in Point Break.
You deserve each other, don't you? I mean, you're just as bad as he is. Only you're a little fatter, you're a little slower, and a little more pathetic.
Charles S. Dutton, of course, had just been in Alien 3 and, you know, was kind of an intimidating-looking guy.
Nobody ever gave me nothing. So I say, fuck that thing. Let's fight it.
So the deck seemed to be stacked against poor Ice-T. Now, there was probably a little bit of tension on the set given all these alpha males being, you know, grouped together in an isolated location. And indeed, if you read Rutger Hauer's biography, he talks about there being a lot of tension between him and Gary Busey.
Forgive me, Father.
He has nothing but nice things to say about Ice-T, but he did not seem to appreciate Gary Busey's role at all, and I can see why. You see, originally Busey had only signed on for a small role, with him the first bad guy to get taken out. It's essentially a glorified cameo, but sometime when they were shooting the big dinner sequence that, you know, comes along pretty early in the film, inspiration struck Busey and he improvised this killer monologue that totally steals the movie. In it, he tells Ice-T about how, when he was a kid, his father forced him to fight and kill the family dog.
I stand up. I wipe the blood off. I lick it. My dad says, welcome to manhood.
Hauer hated this monologue, probably because he knew how damn good it was. But it also established Gary Busey's character as the team's alpha male. And he suggests that Busey was on drugs at the time. But here's the thing, while Busey probably was gacked to the gills, the monologue is great, and director Dickerson not only left it in the movie, but he also said afterwards that had he known how brilliant Busey would be on camera, he would have worked it out to leave him in the movie longer. In one sequence, Busey completely steals the movie out from under Rutger Hauer, who's supposed to be the main villain, and it never really recovers.
Look into his little beady eyes. That way, you will be devouring his soul. Doc, sometimes you even scare me.
Apparently, Hauer insisted that they shoot a scene where he puts Busey's character in his place, but Dickerson decided to cut it out, and as a result, Hauer feels like less of a threat than he should. After all, if Ice-T is able to waste the scariest of the crew, Gary Busey first, he should be able to take out the rest, right? That's perhaps the movie's biggest misstep, but it's hard to blame anyone for letting Busey run amok because it's also the best scene in the movie. Notably, the movie does try to flesh out the hunters, with John C. McGinley somewhat sympathetic as the businessman who starts to have a change of heart.
I ain't going out with you no more. I'm through. Now, if I can't stop you, then I can't stop you. I'm going home.
William McNamara's character, who's the son of F. Murray Abraham's character, is also shown to be somewhat reluctant, but he goes along with everyone, so you never feel too bad for him when he eventually gets brutally killed.
Know one thing. If we get through this shit, I swear to God, I will never forget this, because I am not like you.
You're on Ice's side the whole time, as well you should be. Some of the action sequences in this are pretty nifty, with Dickerson one of the most underrated journeyman directors of the era, with him also directing Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight and the Damon Wayans Adam Sandler flick Bulletproof, which is worth checking out too. To me, this is one of his best movies, but sadly it's hard to find as New Line never bothered putting out an HD version of it. You can get it in standard definition and on DVD, but there's no Blu-ray release, and I wouldn't expect to see it on HBO Max anytime soon. Sadly, the movie was a bit of a last hurrah for Rutger Hauer, who soon after got regulated to a slew of direct-to-video movies before having a bit of a comeback in the 2000s in Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, Batman Begins, and The Great Hobo with a Shotgun before tragically passing away.
Maybe you'll end up like me. A hobo with a shotgun. I hope you can do that.
As for Busey, for all the chemically induced brilliance he shows here, he was never able to capitalize on what was very clearly some immense talent even after his notorious motorcycle accident. And now, unfortunately, he's a guy that we mostly joke about, even though at one time he was a brilliant actor. Ice-T actually went on to have a really decent career in front of the camera. The movie tanked at the box office but became a popular rental. Thus, he wound up cranking out a bunch of DTV action movies before landing the gig of a lifetime as one of the leads on Law & Order SVU, which he's been on for about 23 seasons now. While Surviving the Game may ultimately be pretty obscure, it's a blast to watch with a killer final scene that I'm not going to spoil here, and I highly recommend checking it out if you can find a copy.